Hi, everyone. My name's Sarah Jane Murray, and I'm a professor in the Great Text program in the Honors College at Baylor. I'm very excited that you're considering Baylor as one of your top choices for school. I think there are so many wonderful reasons to go to college, and Baylor is an especially special place to be in college and to be learning. But today I'd like to tell you a little bit about my own learning journey and a little bit about how stories became my passion and how they shape culture has become my calling. So, in many ways, I wasn't sure when I started college what I wanted to study. I was very excited about lots of things: math, science. I ended up in engineering for about 3 years before I transferred over to studying more what had been my minors in the humanities and in French. And that took me on a journey to Princeton, where I went to graduate school to study literature. But as some of you may know, I've since found my way into the world of film and storytelling for a broader public outside of the academy. And I really credit my work in great texts, as well as my PhD in literature at Princeton, with what gave me the recipe for success once I got to studying screenwriting at UCLA and out in the field making movies. And it all began, of course, with a story. When I was in graduate school, my advisor, Carl Udy, gave me a copy of Plato's Myth of Atlantis to read. This is a story at the beginning of the Timaeus, and it goes something like this. A long time ago, thousands of years ago, there was an ancient city in Egypt. And Solon, the famous Athenian lawgiver, after going through countless legal reforms, he was really tired. He was ready to take a sabbatical, and he sailed to Egypt. When he landed, he was amazed at the depths of learning, the technological advances, so many things that he didn't think Athens had. And he marveled that the Egyptians had made good use of their time and really elevated themselves to this pinnacle of scientific inquiry. Oh, the priest that's showing Solon around Egypt laughs. Oh, Solon, he says, you Greeks are only children. You are so young, you have no traditions, no stories hoary with age. And Solon doesn't understand. He says, what do you mean? And the priest explains to him that contrary to popular belief, Athens is the older civilization by a good thousand, maybe more years. But the difference is that the Athenians do not record their stories. They do not keep them in places of learning, in temples like the Egyptians. And so the Athenians lose sight of their past, they lose sight of who they are, and they don't know where they've come from. To make his point, the Egyptian priest tells Solon a story. He tells him of this island out in the Atlantic Ocean that long ago was the home of bloodthirsty tyrants. I mean, the Atlanteans sought to conquer the entire European continent, and they might well have succeeded if the Athenian army had not come to the aid of the rest of the world. You see, they ventured into Europe and brought nations to their knees. They ventured even into Asia and were determined to continue as far as they possibly could go. But the Athenians fought valiantly against them, and step by step, they pushed the Atlanteans back until the last battle took place on the island of Atlantis itself. The story doesn't end there, because the final battle, at its climax, ends in the middle of the night. And before the Athenians, who have defeated the Atlanteans, can claim and celebrate their victory, an enormous tidal wave sweeps across the whole island, and it sinks to the bottom of the ocean. Since that day, thousands of articles have been written about Atlantis. It's been the subject of books. It's the name of restaurants. Hotels have been named after it, even the region of the planet Mars. But I think, perhaps, a lot of these interpreters miss Plato's point. Ah, Solon, you Greeks are only children if you forget your stories. Well, how did Solon learn the story of Atlantis from the priest? I like to think that it's probably chiseled in hieroglyphs on the walls of the Egyptian temples, and that's why the priest can't give a copy to Solon to take home. But he entrusts it to him as an oral story, and it takes several generations for Plato to commit it to writing. Interestingly enough, this was the only dialogue by Plato to survive in the West for hundreds of years. In fact, by the time we get to Raphael painting the School of Athens at the Vatican, and I hope many of you will be fortunate enough to go and visit Rome during your studies, you'll see that Aristotle's holding the Nicomachean Ethics under his arms in this famous painting, and Plato is holding not the Republic, but the Timaeus. You see, for hundreds of years, the Timaeus taught people the importance of writing their stories down. It taught us how stories shape culture. It taught us how they shape national sensibilities. And it really helps to question the idea advanced by Plato in the Republic that the storytellers should be cast out of the city. In fact, Plato never really says that, does he? He suggests that the bad storytellers, those who lead others astray, the people whom Dante will name false counselors when you read the Inferno and meet Ulysses, those are the people that we need to curtail. Storytellers must have ethics. They too must think of the greater good. They too must think about how the stories they tell, the stories they disseminate in the world around them, shapes the minds, the intellects, the social conditions, and the general landscape, the cultural landscape in which we live. Now, I spent, all of my 20s pretty much traveling around Europe and reading manuscripts of the Timaeus. It was an amazing time of my life. I got to work at the Vatican Library, or the Library of the King and Queen of Spain, the British Museum. I mean, I could not have had a more exciting time thinking about how the Western world responded to this exhortation to tell our stories well and to write them down. And ultimately, that's what brought me to Baylor. I still teach the medieval intellectual tradition class in great texts. And as we explore those texts from, say, Boethius to Marie de France, Dante and Chrétien de Troyes, we think about how storytelling shapes our lives, both external and internal, our internal quests and journeys, the theological dimension of our lives, pretty much everything around us. And of course, in my work with film and digital media, that carries over into social justice filmmaking, as well as storytelling with values for narrative feature films and television. What does all that have to do with our general education? I think it has everything to do with the pursuit of learning, the pursuit of critical thinking, learning to look at the world through a lens that you make fully your own and informed with the voices of other thinkers, with the stories that have been passed down from generation and generation, and that invite us into this quest for what it means to be human. For me, it means every day waking up and thinking about what kind of world I want to live in, what stories I want to shape and create. And when I work with my thesis students, they too are thinking about the stories they will send out into culture, but also the stories they are ingesting. You know, as much as we may not want to eat junk food and our body doesn't run well on it, how does our soul run if we don't think about the stories that we're digesting? How do we make sure that our story diet is healthy? Now, this spills into all types of different fields, right? I mean, storytelling doesn't just shape the working of our mind and the internal stories that we tell ourselves. It also spills into science. One of my favorite little tricks is what I call the OCD of insanely great storytelling. And scientists and behavioral psychologists love this stuff. They really devote their lives to studying it. OCD stands for oxytocin, cortisol, and dopamine. And those are the chemicals that are at play in your brain when you're listening to a great story or watching a great movie. How does it work? Well, you know, those moments where you feel really intensely bonded to a character, maybe you cry. You know, I got teary-eyed recently watching Just Mercy and thinking about the criminal justice system, or watching Eva DuVernay's 13th. It's a very emotional engagement with these facts out in the world. And that's because when we connect with characters in storytelling, we release oxytocin, the same chemical that is released when mothers bond with their children. for example, or when you hug your pet. Cortisol, of course, is the chemical that makes us feel stressed out. And that happens when we're at climactic moments of the story and we don't know what's going to happen next. And dopamine, which acts like a save button in our brain, is released when we encounter something new or a new spin on something that we're quite familiar with, when we get excited. It sears information in our memory. And because of all of those tricks of great storytelling, we can write great scripts. We can write great plays, but we can also make learning engaging and fun. In fact, learning is the most toxic experience on earth. It releases dopamine all the time. So there you have it, the OCD of insanely great storytelling. This applies to marketing. It applies to other realms of behavioral psychology. You know, how do we tell truthful stories about things that people need rather than ethically selling people things that perhaps they don't need or that don't serve them well? What about the stories that we send out in the news? How does this shape the ethics of journalism? And how does it shape our own inner consciousness and the way we engage with the thoughts in our minds? I'm sure all of you have had that experience where you're maybe laying in bed asleep at night and your brain is just clocking over and you're racing and you're envisioning the future, and it just gets oppressive until we pull it back and anchor back down and do something that a good friend of mine, William Paul Young, likes to say is living within the grace of one day, understanding our place in the human condition, understanding that we are both unlimited in our relationship with God and in the spirit that we carry in us, and yet finite in our lives and our abilities here on earth. So I think that I would just leave you with the thought that storytelling ultimately is something that deeply transforms all of our relationships. You're going to get a little snapshot from, I'm going to give a shout out to my UPS and FedEx deliverer who just came by, but I'll keep him because they're doing very important work at the moment. Storytelling, you see, there's an old proverb that says that the shortest line between two people is a story. And I think what you're being invited into today is to think about what story you're going to write with your life. What are you going to learn to shape the landscapes of decision making that will guide you, not just because you take a class, but because that class will shape the way you engage with other human beings and with the world, and it will shift and change the information you have at your disposal to make wise decisions. Your venture into learning at a university, I think, is not about amassing knowledge. You know, this is something that Dante talks about in the Purgatory as well. It's not about pursuing sort of intellectual gluttony, this desire to know above all else, you know, to pick the fruit in the garden. He'll create that analogy as we move through the second half of Purgatory. It's more about figuring out how you can best apply the talents that you have been given to serve the world and your calling and God well. And I think that as you're invited into this practice of thinking about what story you want to tell with your life right now, it's really important that you figure out your why. Why am I coming to college? And I'm talking about that in the non-transactional way. Why am I coming to college right here, right now? And how do I perhaps hope that it'll open up a new world of possibilities to me? All of your whys will be different. For me, my why has taken me through the corridors of the British Museum and the Vatican, all the way to the Netflix offices in Los Angeles. Your why may take you to become a doctor or a nurse on the front lines of society. Your why may take you to graduate school to study classics. Your why may take you to the heights of engineering. Your why may take you to raise an amazing family. Your why can take you anywhere as long as you engage with it and figure out what it is. You don't have to have all the answers right now. You just have to be willing to take a first step into the story, to venture out on that call to adventure and to see what the future holds. Oh, Solon, said Plato. Um, in the Timaeus, you Greeks are only children. You have no knowledge hoary with age, no sense of tradition. I think that the adventure that you're being invited into is one for a quest for wisdom, to find balance in your lives, and to answer the tiny whisper in your ear that says that there's a story that you're supposed to be part of that is greater than yourself. And if you're ready to answer that call, then for me, I find my answer in the Honors College at Baylor. And if you do, I hope you will look me up when you arrive on campus. Good luck, choose wisely, and most of all, embrace the calling to write your story because it'll take you on adventures that you could never dream of.